Right, welcome everyone. This is an academic chatter. I think it's number 4. This is the first one that's probably, although we've not quite decided yet, probably going to go out on the website, the main website. The other 3 are hosted in the membership site. Wanted to put this one out live. Me and James have spoken a bit over the last year, and I think the themes that we talk on, that we're going to touch on, are quite useful for people. So this is why this one's going out and to a wider audience. If you want to have a look at the other ones, I'll put a link below to the membership site to have a look at them. And also, we're recording this just before a Doing Social Science virtual lab, where me and James are going to talk about research philosophy from a quant and a qualitative perspective. So that's also going to be hosted in the membership site. So plenty of stuff to kind of have a look at. Okay, so before we get into a few ideas about what we're going to talk about, do you just want to introduce yourself, James?
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Well, I mean, thanks for inviting me, Chris.
My
Always
pleasure.
good to have a nice chat, be sat inside while it's beautiful weather outside. So I guess introduction, my name's James Steele. My educational background is I did an undergraduate in sport and exercise science. PhD was in similar sort of area, exercise physiology, biomechanics. I've worked over the years in so many different areas. I've kind of lost any kind of semblance of a disciplinary kind of label. And more over the years, I've taken more and more interest in methodology, more broadly speaking, more kind of conceptual and philosophical thinking about what it is we're actually trying to do in, doing science in the kind of broad disciplinary areas that I work in. So that my background has been more quant, but over the years I've been involved in qual stuff as well. I always encourage my students to expand their toolbox as much as possible and embrace, expose themselves to varying methodologies. At the moment, I'm an associate professor of sport and exercise science at Solent University in Southampton, and do research, teach research methods, and enjoy the sun when I can.
Good man. So we're probably going to cover a few things that we've basically chatted over pretty much on Twitter. I think there's been a few WhatsApp things exchanged over time, and you're one of the people who unfortunately gets my WhatsApp rantings at 6 o'clock in the morning when I wake up, because my brain works much better at that time in the morning. And I'm walking the dog and I'm like, right, okay, here you go. And then I remember one I was talking to you about. I was trying to explain almost to myself while I was talking to you about why intersubjectivity was interesting for you. And I think we both agreed it was, but also that the problem you were working on was a bit different. Anyway, so we'll go over a few bits and bobs. We'll have a bit of a turn and fro. So the first one, and this is the most recent one that we were basically talking about, was teaching methods. We'll deal with some of the philosophy stuff when we get into the Doing Social Science lab, but the actual teaching of it. And what was the chat? Oh yes, it was you were talking about delivering some quantitative analysis for undergrads. So do you want to just set that up and then we can kind of have a chat about where we went with that? Because I think mine was do anything that works, basically, is how to teach methods.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you know what? It's been interesting. So, I mean, maybe another bit of background is worth as well. I've actually been out of teaching, at least teaching undergrads, for probably the better part of the last 4 years, because I kind of had a straddling role where I was working for a not-for-profit research organisation, UK Active, whilst also having a foot in the door as an academic at the university. But I was just teaching and supervising PhDs, doing research and whatnot. But I've come back into that now, and Chris will laugh. I kind of had this existential crisis where I was like, shit, I don't think I can teach undergrads anymore. I don't know if I can dumb this down enough. So it's been an interesting journey, and I've had to kind of think a little bit carefully about how do I go about structuring a level 5, second year undergrad research methods module, and also coming back in working in the constraints of, I remember this used to be a year-long 2-semester module, and all of a sudden, and that's what I was starting to plan and thinking I can cover the breadth of things. I can start with the philosophical underpinnings that I want them to think about, and I can take it through from kind of underlying philosophical assumptions through to forming their research ideas and thinking about methodologies and more specifically methods, and how do they analyze and interpret, and all the way through that kind of research cycle. I've got a year to do it. And then I got told I've got 12 weeks. And and I suddenly had to take all this content and go and squeeze it into a short period of time. So yeah, I think trying to think a bit outside the box of like, what do they need to know to get themselves going? And what can I signpost them to has been the real focus around it. So some really simple, I've tried to, particularly like with the quantitative stuff and with particularly with, for example, quantitative analysis. I've always had an issue with the way statistics is taught at undergraduate level. It's taught in this kind of like recipe format. It's like, you take a cup of this, a cup of that, you follow this flow chart through this, that, and the other. And they learn all these different analysis approaches or statistical tests as being essentially kind of like, these different names as though they're completely different things, without ever realizing that the underpinning kind of statistical theory or model that underpins them all is consistent across 95% of the statistics they'll ever need to use or encounter. So I took a different approach this year, which I've seen others use and seemingly successfully, to scrap all of the traditional approach and just go, let's work from basic principles. Let's work from first principles. If you learn this bit, then everything else should be more intuitively understandable. Even if I don't teach you it directly now, you'll come across it and you'll kind of have the tools to figure it out. So yeah, I've been trying to do that with a lot of it, and I've really, again, given the inability to directly teach all the content I thought I was going to be able to, I've had to kind of really stress that the module was about introducing ideas to them, dipping our toes in the water with them, learning the basic principles that are going to help them get started, but then making sure they realize they've got to take, ownership for advancing their learning and learning more about these things and thinking, digging deep into what they need to know specifically for their research projects and so on. So signposting a lot to different materials, and more often than not, materials where I think to myself, oh, I'd like to do this, and then I find out someone else has already done a better job than I would do of it. So I think, why am I going to reinvent the wheel? I'm going to grab that, steal it with appropriate citation, and work with that. So yeah, it's been interesting to get back into it over this last year.
What you're basically describing is the traditional mode of teaching methods by like rote learning, isn't it? In the same way that we used to learn multiplication. Rather than understanding the concept that underlies multiplication. So, and there's two overlapping issues that are just like whirring around in my head. There is my experience of research methods at Loughborough, which was absolutely abysmal until Mike Atkinson came and started to help me understand research methods, and then it became amazing. I started to love it, and from that moment on, I've always said that research methods should be one of the flagship modules on any degree program, and it should be the thing that students get excited about. And most people look at me like I'm mad. Like people aren't comprehending that when we get into the philosophical underbellies, not only is the teaching that you're talking about loads better, because you're like, right, I'm going to teach you this, and then you're going to be able to do any of these like bits of learning. You can learn any statistical package, whether it's quant or qual, and follow these steps. We can teach that. That's GCSE education. That's schoolhood education. But to understand the underlying methods now, so you're exactly where I want to be when I teach it. Now I don't lead a research methods modules, but I do teach on both, and I can almost volunteer to teach on both because I want to do this sort of stuff. But it's so hard, because unless you can really get the buy-in from the students, and that takes time, like yourself, you can have a module at it. When I go in and I do like this lecture, we're going to think about thinking, and the students are like, what? Because they've just been told the week before, like, do these steps and write them up and you'll pass your assessment. And now I'm thinking about thinking. So that process that you're talking about has to be like a degree-wide way of thinking, I think. And it often isn't. And I don't mean to say that as a negative to colleagues that I teach with. They're doing a good job. They've shifted it over time, but ours was just horrific. No qualitative stuff at all. One, definitely no philosophy, or just piecemeal versions of it. And it basically sets our students up for failure in the future. because they don't understand why they're doing the stats they're doing other than to pass. And then when they go to a master's class or PhD or, God forbid, going to be a data analyst, they don't get it, do they? So
I mean, we you know, everyone uses the online platforms, Canvas, whatever it is, Moodle and stuff nowadays. I don't know what ours is, Moodle probably, but on the do you know what, I'm very lucky actually. We're in a weird validation limbo at the moment, where we've got multiple overlapping validations for different courses. And so when I came back in, I kind of said, like, look, I'm coming back, I want to teach research methods. That's it. I like, you know, I don't feel, yeah, I'd be comfortable going and teaching across a bunch of different substantive disciplines, given I've worked in those areas and could certainly cover undergrad stuff for them. But I was like, that's not what I want to do. I want to do this. And if I'm doing it, I want to lead it and I want to dictate what it looks like. And if anything, you know, unless it's a ridiculous number of students and groups, like I want to teach it all as much myself rather than having to necessarily, you know, initially upskill everyone. You know, that'll take time and get more people involved. But I did get very lucky in that we had what used to be one big research methods module across sports science, health and exercise science, sports therapy, you know, a bunch of different degree courses that we run. Kind of weirdly, because of these overlapping validations, we ended up having two separate research methods modules, one for sport science, sport therapy, one for health and exercise science, fitness, personal training and stuff like that. So I was able to pinch one of them and take it over and just run it the way I want it to. And it's interesting because we do actually now have in parallel running my module, the way I run it, and then the traditional module, which is still to extent run, you know, in the way you kind of described. But yeah, it's tough work trying to get that departmental and institutional buy-in with it. I think, yeah, we were talking the other day. I said, after I ran a couple of intro stats sessions for the undergrads, I'd also recently had some conversations with colleagues and collaborators where, you know, it's something as simple as I do, you know, without needing to go into, I won't go into detail with it, but I use a lot of what are called like mixed effects models in my statistical analysis for a lot of things now. And, you know, it's a kind of technique you don't get taught that at undergrad. No one knows. Yeah, most of my colleagues have never heard of them before. And there's nothing really that fancy. They're not really any different than just a regular regression kind of model, really. And the way you interpret the outputs or the main parts of the outputs and, you know, what they're telling you is similar. And I'd sent some stuff over to a colleague, some analysis I'd done on a project we're working on. And some of the questions he was coming back with, I was thinking, shit, you know, I've just literally covered this with my undergrads. And like, I would be able to send this to them, and assuming they were paying attention, they in theory should know what these results are saying, but I'm having to kind of explain it to, you know, someone with apparently a quant background. Yeah, and so I thought, you know, fuck this, I'm going to, you know, I never thought to check, but I assume there's no parental warning on the videos.
No, you're fine, mate, you're fine.
Yeah, I thought, you know, I'm going to see if any staff want to take this and see what the uptake is. And it's been a few people have come back in and said, yeah, we'd love it if you could like basically run almost this module for staff over the summer. So I'm going to get a small group, you know, it's only going to be maybe at most 4 or 5 staff because, you know, those who are interested will self-select into it anyway. Yeah. But yeah, my hope is to get a bit more of that institutional buy-in and whatnot. And I was just pulling it up because I thought I wrote something going back to the module page. I put a line on there when it was sort of like, you know, welcome from the module leader, what's the module about and stuff like that. And it finishes up with, honestly, with no disrespect meant to the other modules or their leaders, this is probably the most important module you will take. The epistemic understanding you'll develop underpins every other module you will take and the knowledge contained within it.
Yeah. And I probably good that you've got the no disrespect comment, but that's how methods should be taught and treated. And just on the kind of colleague buy-in, you know, I have similar conversations where I'm very comfortable, not that I know everything, but very comfortable talking research philosophy, especially to kind of in my area of social sciences. And if we have that knowledge across the department is the same, well, then everyone will kind of toe the same line. But when there's certainly still people in the department, and most departments probably, who don't understand what ontology and epistemology is, we can't really start pushing this kind of idea, because if they don't understand what the idea is, they've probably not figured out how important it is. They probably don't enjoy thinking about it and all the rest of it. So we struggle with the kind of circling of the wagons really there. And then we end up with this, there's two kind of overlapping issues there, with the students wanting stuff that goes directly to the assessment and assessing philosophical stuff. Okay, that's useful, I think, and should be done, but it's a tough sell when you're also going to have to assess them on what a t-test is or what an interview looks like. So the drive to the practical dimension of it without the philosophical is there from a student perspective and from a staff perspective. And we really are kind of like struggling in that respect to pull everyone along. One of the places that I've really wanted to, and I don't hold much hope of it, but I wanted to go and work is like somewhere like the Sheffield Methods Institute, somewhere like that. So I know I'm going to go in and I'm going to be like, I'm not going to know anything, and I'm just going to have to be pulled along by all these people who know so much. But it's almost the opposite in our departments. I don't construct it as a criticism of colleagues, because I know how hard it is to finish a PhD, get stuff published, and worry about philosophy, right? It doesn't really work that easily for people. I think the way that we've constructed our careers, which is probably what we'll come on to in a bit, allows us to just separate out slightly from the treadmill of like, I've got to publish another paper, I've got to do another funding bid, I haven't got time to take a breath and read books that don't apply, obviously. But they do apply, and we're recognizing that more and more. And that's, what we're going to talk about in the Doing Social Science Lab, I think. Okay, let's move on a little bit. I'm just going to change the order. We did have a bit of a basic plan for this. I'm just going to change the order slightly because we talked about teaching and just continue down that path. One of the other conversations we had was when you were starting to get back into teaching was like, how would I describe it? You should describe it. Some nerves about going back into teaching maybe was the right way. How are you kind of experiencing that? You did touch on it earlier.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Like I had this moment where I think it's a result of having, spent the better part of, like I say, the last 4 years not interacting with undergrads. And if I did interact with them, it was because the better ones had caught wind of, right, there's this guy who does this stuff, the research guy there, and they gravitate towards me, or the few other staff that are more research engaged, and they kind of have the similar sort of conversations with myself, or at least come to me with questions. They would send students over, and so I'd spent all this time having much deeper, much more kind of high level conversations with PhD students and with like-minded colleagues, that I suddenly had this realization of like, I don't know, like, what level am I supposed to pitch this at for undergrads? Because there was, I think, the tension, like I was trying to figure out what it was, and I was sort of trying to think, it was a tension between what level should be appropriate for them, and kind of what I wish I was taught when I was at that, at their stage. I kind of wish a lot of the stuff I'm teaching now, like I don't know how, only time will tell how well it's worked, but I've tried to find a balance between, I want them to learn these ideas or be introduced to these ideas. And I think introduce is what I've kind of fell on in terms of the balance of like let's introduce the ideas to them. They might not understand them. In fact, there's a nice paper I set them as reading, like from week one, which was on the importance of stupidity in research, and kind of saying, most of, like, you kind of know you're on the right path if you feel stupid most of the time. Right. Yeah, you're coming across ideas you don't understand. Like, that's good. Expose yourself to, that uncomfortable feeling. And I tried to stress in them, that's how I feel most of the time. Of course, there's tons of stuff I feel super confident with and whatnot, but, I'm always trying to learn new things. And yeah, it was it was weird feeling that kind of nervousness. I think also there was a little bit of kind of personal situation from it as well, because the reason for coming back in was, a redundancy from the other job. And, I wasn't I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to get the full-time contract back at Solent,
Yeah, I
and
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, all of this kind of stuff, which was making me sort of like question, should I be coming back and doing this? Is there something? Should I be doing something else? And yeah, it was kind of a mix of things, which culminated in this like, oh my god, I don't know if I can do this anymore.
Yeah. And we talked about, I think previously or after that, we talked about my kind of notions of basically lecturing on the fly. We'd had an interaction with one of your colleagues. I had an interaction with one of your colleagues.
Yeah.
That was it. I'd posted something about I'd put two marker pens, and like, I'm going to go and deliver a lecture. I've thought about it for 5 minutes or something like, I can't remember. And lots of people were like, wow, that's interesting. Well, we should be doing that. And then other people were like, oh my God. And this guy was like, you kind of, what was it that I was
disdain for the students.
That was it, disdain for the students. And I was like, I engaged them, was like, I mean, if anyone who knows me, I've got disdain for lots of things, but not my students. I'm very confident that I'm going to do a good job doing that. And actually, by going in like that, I'm on the seat of my pants a little bit, and I'm up for it now, rather than like some of the old stuff that I might kind of dredge out and do. Like, so that was, what was that? Yeah, 2 pens. No notes, just a couple of ideas in my head, and an order in my head. Right, I have a story to tell in my head, and I'm going to go and do that. And then we had that conversation. I think the kind of take-home message there is, well, there's a practical one, but there's a broad one, which is, if we're experts, and I've said this again in that, if we're experts, well, let's go. Let's use our expertise. And I happily, I know people don't like saying stuff like this, but happily say I'm an expert in the stuff that I'm an expert in. I'm not an expert in loads of stuff, and I get stuff wrong all the time. However, like, by definition, I've got a PhD and I've published pretty widely on this stuff. Like, if you can't accept that you're an expert after doing that, I think there's a reorganization needs to be had. And one of those, and there's the practical point, is just getting rid of PowerPoint. And maybe not straight away. I'm not saying that this was something that I did when I first came out of PhD, certainly not. But after like 10 years at the coalface of like hammering this stuff and knowing it really well, I don't need PowerPoint anymore. I mean, I've really used PowerPoint, I use Prezi, but I don't need that anymore. And it frees everything up. And not only that, so those lectures are really good. The students like them. I get positive feedback on them. Yes, they're not perfect. Yes, it can be better. But what it does is it makes me go into class and properly sharpen my analysis and remember my thought processes. It's basically a heuristic device. It helps me remember the order of these arguments and this critical analysis. My head maintains its sharpness, my sharpness of those ideas, because I do that. And I part of the issues I have around that sort of thing is because I couldn't do this for a bit because of all the problems I had with concussion and bangs to the head and all the rest of it from boxing. Now I can. I like celebrate that. I want to go in and do that. It's wicked. So I think you tried some of that yourself, hadn't you? Or you've been working on it or something, or you...
Oh yeah, no, I've bought in wholeheartedly this year for my teaching, and to give you like a very recent example, I actually went up to Loughborough yesterday to give a guest session. I did a guest session with their master's students, and it works better with master's students anyway. Yeah. But I kind of, in the interactions when we were planning it, I said, look, I'm taking a bit of a new approach. I'm not really doing slides or anything like that. So I tell you what, here's some papers, that I think would be worth them having a read through. Tell them to come up with some questions. What do they want to know? What do they want to get out of this session? Send them over to me in advance. Then I'm going to come along and I'm going to basically just facilitate this kind of, I'll lecture in the sense of covering what they've asked, but then I want it to flow. I want it to be a Socratic dialogue. I want it to be a back and forth. And then also we did a practical workshop as well, where we were in the gym doing some stuff. And I had a loose idea of what I wanted to do, but really I let the discussion we had lead into what I would do there as well. So it was funny, like when I got there, I said, okay, so the lectins here, it's all signed in for you. I was like, oh no, honestly, I don't need that. Like, I've not prepared slides. And like, oh, okay. And the students loved it. Like, they were afterwards, they were saying, that was completely different to what we've had before. It was fun. It was engaging. They were, really kind of caught up in the whole thing. And I've tried doing that with the undergrads for research methods this year. It's been a bit of a weird one because every university's taken slightly different policies given what's happened over the last few years. But Solent's currently got this situation where lectures are all pre-recorded and online, and then we have in-person seminars, workshops, and things like that. And so I thought to myself, do you know what? I've got colleagues who I know spend hours and hours and hours preparing slides, making them look sexy and slick and all this kind of stuff, and they're amazing. And then I've watched them deliver them, like this is even before COVID, like watch them deliver them in person, and they kind of stumble, and if someone asks a question that throws them off track, then they can't sort of like, there's no reactivity to what they're doing. They haven't got necessarily they probably have got the fluency to do it, but they've straitjacketed themselves in with this structure. And one of the things I've found as well is coming back in and sort of trying to figure out what's the expectations now with the way things are. And I've spoke to colleagues who they will literally take like 5-6 goes at recording their pre-recorded lecture.
Oh, man. Oh,
and I was like, what? I mean, you don't get to fucking redo it. Like if you balls it up live, pre-COVID, like you don't get to walk out and go, right, we'll start again, guys, and come back in. So I set myself a rule. I said, right, no slides. I'm gonna, I've got some notes. Like I've got like basically like 5 or 6 bullet points of like, these are the things I definitely need to remember to cover. And I don't want to kind of waffle on and go off on a tangent and then realize after I've stopped recording, I forgot to mention that bit.
Yeah.
But it's actually worked really well, I think, because I like the ability to, when I'm talking about things, I'll often refer to, it will pop into my head like, oh, that paper, that study is a good example of this thing I'm talking about. Or, you should all read this paper. And the nice thing has been to be able to just go like, oh, just hit share screen and show them it while on the pre-recording, rather than having slides to refer to. I just open up the paper, go to the bit I want to talk about. Or with statistics, for example, I use a lot of like visualization, interactive visualizations and things like that. Because I just think it's easier to kind of picture what the math is doing, and then it kind of clicks a little bit better. And yeah, it's worked quite well, I think. And then I've done the same with the live sessions as well. I've had an outline of what we want to cover, no slides, and gone in and done it. And I think the students like it. I think they once they buy into it takes a little while because they're not used to it because no one else is doing that. But after a few weeks, they kind of started to get it. They kind of started to realize as well, it emphasized that need for them to take ownership of the learning. It's like, look, we're going to discuss this in this session. We can't discuss it if you've not like had a look at it at least, And I'd always try and sort of set the bar a little bit low. There's a paper, I know they're not going to read the damn paper, but if I can upload it with the bits highlighted that I want them to definitely take a look at, then it's, it lowers the bar a little bit. They've all at least kind of like, had a look at it. It's been interesting for them, I think, but it's been freeing for me because all of a sudden, like I've not got a ton of prep work to do. It's all up here, and it just you just put it out.
So many bonuses to it. Yes, you do have to consider students that struggle with engaging in that sort of stuff. So I give them my notes, and I'm like, look, here's my notes. You can see what I'm doing. Follow along. Put your notes on it. I also, when I'm doing recorded ones, just remind them that they can pause the lecture. There's this weird thing where they think it's almost like that it's rude to stop you talking, as it would be in class. I've had to say, listen, if you start drifting, just press pause, come back to it, write some notes, come back, whatever. There's so many things we can do with that. And in terms of live or recorded, doing it in one shot is essential. I think in the whole course of all of the content that I've put on the website and all of the content that I've made for my students over the last 2 years, I re-recorded one once. Which had not quite worked. I think maybe after about 30 seconds, in 30 seconds, if I stumble on something, I'll click record. But there was something I'd done in one. I can't remember what it was, and I re-recorded it. But every other moment, when I stuff up, I do what I do in class and go, you know what, I've said that wrong. I'm going to go back, because that's showing, one, that we get stuff wrong, and two, that it's completely fine to step back and correct yourself. And that process is useful for the students. Oh, he said this, but actually should have said that. Why was that important? Oh, there's a conceptual idea there, which is a teachable moment. Those things are so important. What seems to be the end point for teaching these days is loads and loads of tech. Get loads of tech on there. That'll be good. Loads of slides with your daft things on it. And that's the end point. And what it should be is tech that works, fine. Anything that doesn't enhance it, get rid of it. slides that work fine, and then reduce them over time, so that all it's doing is giving you an order to follow and the students something to look at nominally. But with an endpoint of going, I know it, I don't need it. And when people were like, this is such a novel idea to me, I was like, don't think it's novel. Think this is what, well, I'm 41, so people were teaching me like this, especially Prof. Maguire. I mean, he did have some sort of slides, but it was very flowing.
Overhead.
And before that, obviously, it was what's name's overhead projectors. But before that, of course, it was just people talking and thinking and whatever. So we've lost that. We really have lost that. And one more thing before we move on as well is, when I'm in a lecture theatre and I'm speaking to a group of students and they can't look at the slides because there ain't none, they've got to look at me, and their attention has to stay on me. And I know when it goes, and I won't accept it when it goes, and I'll very quickly get it back. Not being a dick, but I'll be like this is where you're looking, and I'm looking back at you lot. And it turns that social interaction into something which I think is much better for learning, far better for learning for most people. Whenever we talk like this, people always can poke fault at it, and that's fine. But whenever we stay in one method all the time, it's problematic. So I don't want to suggest you always do this. And there's multiple ways you can make it better in different ways. And like you said, you can do classes about reading and about a reading, and you can do classes about a video, and you can use a million different ways. But most of them, if you've done a PhD and you've done a bit of work, I reckon there should be at least half of your teaching that you can probably do with barely any prep. I think. I mean, I am now at the point, luckily, where I do zero prep for anything, literally nothing. When I say zero, I'm talking about what are my 4 points, right, go. And it's as much as that. But that's because I teach all stuff that I'm very, very confident with, and I'm very, very confident teaching it because I've put the hours in, not because I'm clever, not because I've got some sort of like super capabilities and super memory. It's the opposite. Just put the reps in. Like, I can lift more weights because I went to the gym. I can teach better because I tried teaching better.
It's I always try and swing it around a little bit and sort of say, like, it's not that I'm not doing any prep. I've done, the better part of more than decades worth of prep for this. Like that's the prep that's gone into it.
And it's literally years of prep, and it's the last 5 years of reducing things down so that these lectures in my head. You've saved them on your PowerPoint, and you have to use your PowerPoint to remember them. They're in there. That's the difference. And that gets taken to be that we're not putting effort in, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And what I'd always do, if I could do, is get someone who's got a negative approach to it, just come and watch me teach. Like, ask the students, see what they say. All right, we've dragged that part out. Let's just wrap it up a little bit. So, and this actually wraps up these two conversations to some degree, because you've been talking about the ownership you've got of a module. We're both talking about changing teaching so that it suits us, doing the sort of teaching we want, reducing prep, all of that. And the principle that kind of underlines this, I think, that we both align with, is that we well, I won't speak for you, but I would say most academics have more control over what they do and how they do it than they acknowledge or understand. Not all. There's loads of academics in horrific positions on terrible contracts, but if you're quote unquote normal academic with a full-time job where you've got some pressures from work, I think there's a lot of scope for changing things around and basically building a career how you want it to be. That doesn't have to be, my line manager says jump, so I asked how high. Something else. Now, I think anyone who knows me on Twitter or the website knows that I'm very, very much adamant that I'm going to recreate everything how I see fit to a degree. But I think you're doing certain parts of that as well. So I guess like this notion of like creating a career that doesn't follow the obvious path. What's your thoughts on that sort of idea?
Yeah, I mean, I do always try to acknowledge that. Maybe I should clarify. Early on in my career, I used to get kind of pissed off at others, thinking like, why aren't you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why aren't you, and like you say, some aren't necessarily in the position where they can kind of do things exactly the way I do it. But I think that sits on a spectrum. You've got more or less control. It's not you've got none or complete control.
Yeah.
And so you need to kind of like leverage what you're able to, and maybe figure out how you can increase the ability to control over that. But yeah, I mean, like, A lot of it is as well is it kind of comes back to this like prep work that's gone in over the better part of a decade. Early on I was having to do the repeat lab practicals, 8 hours of back-to-back lab practicals, no break, and all of this kind of stuff, but alongside it trying to make sure I got PhD papers published and work on this project and that project. And I think my career has kind of taken a trajectory of, and it's partly driven by my character, which I'm having to rein in a little bit now, which we talked about as well, is saying yes to everything that's interesting without realizing like I don't need to do that anymore. But early on, like that helped a bunch, because it was also during a period when I was able to kind of like just work like, balls to the wall, kind of like absolutely flat out, work on a ton of projects and, spin a ton of plates and, really take that sort of like rapid accelerated route to getting to a position where I can now kind of turn around and go, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I can now spend my time kind of focusing on the stuff that I really want to be doing, the stuff that I really find useful. And it's like my wife always jokes as well, and she knows it full well. If I'm stressed out, it's my fault because I've said yes to too many things. But I think as well, like people just don't realize that. I always say like I've practiced calling people's bluff a lot of the time, because people say like, oh, you said no to this, but realistically, I can't say no to this. And it's like, have you tried? Like, had you tried saying no? She may have. One of my colleagues took on a kind of quote unquote research leadership position, which on the face of it sounded wonderful, and a little bit of a step in towards a better promotion and stuff like that. But I was originally asked about it, and I knew it was just going to be a ton of bullshit admin and like less time to do the stuff I want to do and stuff like that. And probably not even the role that the university needed, but felt like it needed to be seen to be doing that sort of stuff. And I said to her, you should, don't go for it. Say no. What do you want to be doing? You want to be spending more time on your teaching and your research and focusing on the stuff you enjoy. Don't take the admin role just because you think it's going to do that. And she agreed, but took it, and then got to the position where she was not happy with it, but was adamant that it was going to help get that promotion that she wanted. And then she didn't get the promotion. And ahead of time, I'd said to her, like, if you don't get that promotion, like you need to drop this role, because it's draining you of the stuff that you want to do. You're not happy. You're stressed all the time. You're dealing with bullshit all the time. You've got to say, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And I know that there's no one else who will want to do it. So it will also be amusing to see what the university does to try and get someone to do that role. And she's still doing it. So, and I say to her, all the time, whenever she's stressed, I'm like, here's the world's tiniest violin.
Yeah.
You could have said no. It didn't achieve the thing you thought it was going to achieve. So why are you still doing it if you don't like it?
So, I think at the base of this, well, first off, anyone who's got a copy of the book, volume 1, go on to page 222 and read that section, because there's a bit there which catches. Oh, well done, mate. Well done. Which catches all of this exactly as we've just outlined it. But the kind of baseline with this is I think I quote Dolly Parton on this. Figure out who you want to be and then do it on purpose. Figure out what academic you want to be. And I think when most people consider it, most people don't want to be like, most people want promotions, but not necessarily do they understand what comes with it, the things that they have to do. And it'd be great to be a prof, but some of the stuff that comes with that isn't great. It'd be great to get the money of a PL, but most of the stuff that comes with being a PL isn't great. And it's quite easy for me because I'm very aware of my own inabilities. I've got a lot of them. And being a kind of being able to navigate teams and be nice to lots of people isn't one of them. So there's no point me going into low-level management stuff. I've already learned that, it don't work. And also being organized, not very organized. So like, because I know those things, there's no real role for me up that path. All there really is working on stuff that I really like with students that I like and colleagues that I like, and doing that really, really well. That's also the stuff that's dead fun. So I've been forced to figure out what I want to do. and to understand, do a proper self-audit and go, Chris, you're really shit at loads of stuff. Let's not do them. And let's find the stuff that you are good at. All right, teaching and research. Right, let's just do that then. Now, I always have to say this to people because it always has to come with the caveat that you've put in. I worked like an absolute dog when I first started. As we all do, finish your PhD, now the work starts, like brutal. And I did everything and I managed to get a job where I'm happy, but then I pulled back from it. And as I say to as many people who will listen, is it's harder to work less than it is to carry on overworking. And if you can just recognize, you just have to put effort into doing less and effort into saying no and effort into doing more of this stuff and getting better at this, the job can be incredible. We're speaking from such a privilege, and I think both of us recognize that. But most of our colleagues are also in that situation. Like most of my colleagues are full time, and they could do exactly the same, but they don't, and they do these kind of roles, and it pains me. But there we go. Someone's got to do them. But I want someone in the position that you were talking about with your colleague. I want someone to be like, if I take this role, right, I get promoted. And obviously the department's always like, okay, well, listen, I take this role, I get promoted, I keep doing it. If I don't, I'm out. That's how we do it at business. That's how we do it in a business situation. And I'd be like adamant if I went into my head, if I had a department ask me to do some sort of course leadership. I mean, he wouldn't, because he'd know the mess it would make. But he did. I'd be like, right, well, promoted to this amount of money next year. And if not, no. Because that's not, it doesn't say on my contract, do course leadership. It doesn't say shit. It says do extra stuff where appropriate, but not course leadership. That's very different. Yeah. So I guess that's that thing about power and control of what we want, but also figuring out what it is you want to become.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I was going to say as well, because I think you're aware as well. I applied for promotion last year. Solent have been slow with all of this kind of stuff. You know, they're a small university. They're still kind of catching up to what like a proper university looks like. But I've been associate professor for a few years now, and as far as I was concerned, I meet all the criteria that Solent kind of lay out. I've got some nice grants. I've got a ton of papers, lots of PhD completions, teaching, all this kind of stuff. And, we have a teaching, a knowledge exchange, and a research pathway. So I was going for the research prof role, and I thought that's what I wanted. And I didn't get it. And, I was disappointed why. The reasons were a bit kind of bullshit, if I'm being completely honest. The reasons I was given were that I didn't meet certain criteria that were not in any of the documentation. But
right, yeah.
But I thought, you know what, sod it. I reflected on it a little bit, and I thought, I'm not sure I want it. I get paid enough money. Like I get, we don't live a lavish lifestyle. I get paid, more than I need to get paid. Really, I'm happy with the money I'm on at the moment. Of course, more money is always nice, but for me, I suddenly realized, we don't have very many full profs. In fact, in our faculty, we don't have any. I would be the only full prof in the faculty if I got given that. All of a sudden, there's a spotlight on me and expectations to do stuff, when at the moment, I get left alone. I get to do the teaching I want to do. I get to do the research I want to do. I'm kind of my own boss. My line manager's very laissez-faire, hands-off, kind of, looks over occasionally and goes, oh, yeah, still doing papers and stuff, and it all looks good over there, and that's it. And I suddenly thought, I don't want to jeopardize that. Like I've got to a level I'm happy with now, and now what I want to do is I want to enjoy that, and anything else, consultancy can bring in more money and stuff like that. But I'm really happy with the position I'm in now. Now what I want to do is think more longer term about projects, rather than like the career plan being get that promotion, get that position. I want to think, what's my plan over the next few years for the ideas I want to work on, the research projects I want to do, the data I want to generate, the ideas I want to kind of like test. That's where I'm kind of thinking with it now, and I can do that better here than there.
Yeah, and ideally, and this is kind of the we both have a similar sort of position. By focusing on those things that we want to do, you get them done really well. You don't get caught up in the baggage of this, that, and the other that profs do. And there are certain profs that are just, be able to just disappear into that world. But at our institutions, we wouldn't be. And what, lo and behold, 5 years later, you've done all the stuff that people are like, oh, okay, you just got to give them something really now, because of all the good contributions you've made. So it all seems to work. Those conversations don't get had. I'm trying to have them as much as possible. It's why I write about them in the book, even though it's a research book. I talk about this sort of stuff because it's so important. Just a couple of bits for people who have got all the way to the end of this. On the membership site, there's a section about recording lectures on the fly. You should have a look at that. I talk about the process of how to kind of get to it a little, like get the reps in, basically, of how to get to that. And a bunch of other things about teaching and learning in there, and work-life balance. There's loads of stuff on there. So if anyone wants to have a look at that, there's information below about the membership site. Right, mate, we've got to call it there because I've got to go and get a cup of tea. We've got to meet again in 5 minutes for doing social science virtual lab. So thanks very much, mate. Really appreciate it. I'll put some links to anything that you want me to put below as well. So people check James's stuff out below. Oh, you've got a new blog, haven't you? Is it a blog?
Yeah. Because I've got some weird obsession with effort, so I've set up something separate to put stuff on there. Because I've decided I'm not going to publish that stuff as papers. It's all going to go on there, open access, blah blah blah. You know,
wicked.
Don't need the papers, all that kind of stuff.
That's another thing that we should have talked about. We'll do that in the second one. We've talked about this notion of like getting control of your writing, haven't we, and all of that sort of stuff. All right, let's leave it there. I'll put a link to your blog so people can check that out. Thanks very much, mate. Really appreciate it. Good conversations.
Cool. Catch you in a bit.